everyone, it's Miss Landis here. Today we are going to be working on our contingency plan day 8, which is topic 16, lesson 3, classify quadrilaterals. Yesterday in lesson 2, we classified triangles, which are three-sided shapes. Today we are classifying quadrilaterals, which are four-sided shapes. And a way that you can help remember that quadrilateral means a four-sided shape is the word part quad, which means four, like a quad has four wheels. So quadrilaterals have four sides. All of the shapes we are looking at today will be quadrilaterals. Our outline for today will be completing the solve chair, the look back, the convince me, and then page 835 to 836, numbers 1 through 11, 15, and 18. So let's get started by looking at our solve and share and reading our I can statement. So for lesson 16, 3, classify quadrilaterals. Our I can statement. I can reason about line segments and angles to classify quadrilaterals. Yesterday we looked at the line segments and angles of triangles. Today we're doing the same thing in order to classify or name four-sided shapes. Our solve and share says draw 3 different four-sided shapes that have opposite sides parallel. Now, you want your opposite sides, so when we say opposite, opposing. So on the opposite side would be if we were looking at this highlighter box. These two sides here are parallel. These two sides here are parallel. So that's what that means when the sides need to be parallel. So you need to draw 3 different four-sided shapes that have opposite sides parallel. So at this point, you can pause the video and try, and I will go over the 3 shapes that I decided to draw when you're finished trying it yourself. Okay, so the 3 four-sided shapes with opposite sides that are parallel that I decided to draw. Now, for my first shape, I drew a square, and I know that a square has 4 equal sides and 4 right angles. My second shape is a rectangle, which is very similar to a square. It has 2 sets of parallel sides, and it has 4 right angles, but not all of its sides are the same length. The last shape that I drew, some people would call a diamond, but it's very specifically called a rhombus if it has 4 sides that are equal, but not all of the angles are right angles. So my rhombus is a little bit funky looking. Nobody's perfect. So these are my 3 different shapes. So I'm going to show you the parallel sides. So in the square, remember we need to have opposite sides that are parallel. So these are the opposite sides that are parallel here in my square. That's one set of opposite parallel sides. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that better. There. And then my other opposite sides that are parallel. So in looking at those lines, they are going in the same direction and they're not going to touch. That's what parallel means. So in my rectangle, that would be the parallel sides here and parallel sides here. In the rhombus, parallel sides here, and parallel sides here. So you could have drawn slightly different shapes. Maybe you also had a square, you also had a rectangle. You could have drawn actually you couldn't have drawn a trapezoid, and you'll see why. But there's different other names that we can give to these shapes as well. So when we're naming shapes, you'll see today that this isn't just a square. We can also call it a quadrilateral. It has 4 sides. We can also call all of these shapes parallelograms because by definition, parallelograms have 2 opposite sides that are parallel, 2 sets of opposite sides that are parallel. And we'll get into that when we get into the lesson. So first, let's look at our look back. What attributes do your shapes have in common? This is a very similar question to yesterday's look back. Today we're using Math Practice 7, which is use structure. So when we're using structure to answer a math question, we're using a framework to answer the question. So we're using kind of the structure of what we know about these shapes that we drew to form some kind of answer. And it's very similar to yesterday's. And I'm going to show yesterday's. Yesterday's was a different math practice. It's generalized. So when you generalize, you make a general statement about something using what you know. So yesterday we had to make a statement about our triangles. And I want to point out in yesterday's video too that I made a mistake. And thank you for the person who let me know that in my video when I was talking about the 2 shapes that were equilateral triangles, I said B and G, but I accidentally wrote a C here. So I'm going to turn that into a G. This was from yesterday's video, but I wanted to point out that the question is very similar. What is true about all 7 triangles you sorted? We said that they all had 3 sides and they all had 3 angles. When we say what attributes do your shapes have in common, the word attributes means like their features. What features do all of these shapes have? Well, the first thing that we were supposed to do was make sure they had 4 sides. So all shapes have 4 sides. And the other thing that we were supposed to do is make sure the opposite sides are parallel. So the structure that we can use is kind of the structure of the question that we were asked to answer, or kind of the task that we were given. We can use that structure to help us talk about the attributes. So 3 different 4-sided shapes. So all 3 shapes have 4 sides. Now looking at the structure of our task that we were given, that have opposite sides parallel. All 3 shapes have opposite sides that are parallel. All right, and those are the features or attributes that our shapes have in common. So let's get into our lesson and discuss how we can classify or name these different 4-sided shapes today. So we can turn the page. And I'm just going to disconnect it from my work page, just because this is going to be really handy in helping me answer the questions. So I kind of want to have them side by side. So you could do that too. All right, our essential question today is how can you classify quadrilaterals? So thinking about the word classify, it means to name or sort. So how can we name these quadrilaterals? Now we have 5 different names that we're going to be using today, and they're all highlighted. So this will help you when you go to do your independent practice. You can use this page to help you figure out when you see a shape, which one does it match here. I'm going to add the definition for quadrilateral, so you can write that on your notes too, because I think it would be really helpful to just have it here. So quadrilateral is a shape with 4 sides and 4 angles. So you can add that to your notes too, just to help you, because a lot of students, I know in our iReady lessons, we're getting to lessons that were about quadrilaterals, and a lot of students ask me, what is a quadrilateral? So it's something that I think it does come up in 3rd grade, but some geometry is always at the end of our curriculum, so sometimes it's not something we spend a lot of time on. So we might have forgotten what a quadrilateral is, but it's a shape with 4 sides and 4 angles. All right, so let's begin with how can you classify quadrilaterals? Quadrilaterals can be classified by their angles or the line segments that make their sides. Which of the quadrilaterals shown have only 1 pair of parallel sides, which have 2 pairs of parallel sides? So there is one shape out of these 5 that is not a parallelogram. It only has 1 pair of parallel sides. And they actually showed it in a different color, which I like. So we have our parallelogram, our rectangle, our square, and our rhombus. They're all orange, and then the trapezoid is purple. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral, so it's a 4-sided shape, but it only has 1 pair of parallel sides. So in looking at the quadrilateral here, I can see these are the parallel sides. The other 2, and I'm going to draw all of this paper here to show you that these 2 sides, if we extended this line here and we extended this line here, they would eventually touch. They would run into each other. So that means that they're not parallel. So the trapezoid is the only shape here that has just 1 pair of parallel sides. The rest of these have 2 pairs of parallel sides. So I'm going to just quickly read the captions for all of them, and she's saying any 4-sided shape can be called a quadrilateral. And that's important today because when we're classifying these shapes, some of them are going to have 4 names, but all of them are quadrilaterals. First is a parallelogram. A parallelogram has 2 pairs of parallel sides. There are many shapes that we can call quadrilaterals and parallelograms, and they could have another name as well. So a rectangle has 4 right angles. It is also a parallelogram. So a rectangle, we can call it a quadrilateral, a parallelogram, and a rectangle. So a rectangle can have 3 different names. A square has 4 right angles, and all sides are the same length. It is, here we go, a parallelogram, a rectangle, and a rhombus. And we'll talk about why it's a rhombus too. But we can also call it a quadrilateral. So the square is the special one that's going to have 4 names. A rhombus is a quadrilateral that has opposite sides that are parallel, and all of its sides are the same length. It is also a parallelogram. So a rhombus is a rhombus, a quadrilateral, a parallelogram, And I think that's everything. So these shapes are going to have more than one name, and that's important when we're completing our independent practice because you're going to have to find all of them. The way that a rhombus and a square are different, both of them have sides that are all the same length, but a square has right angles and a rhombus doesn't. That's what makes them different. So you'll see like the rhombus is the slanted one. And a trapezoid, they're pretty easy to spot. It's a quadrilateral with only one pair of parallel sides. Alrighty, let's look at our Convince Me. How are a parallelogram and a rectangle the same? How are they different? So go ahead and try to answer that independently. Pause the video, and I will go over it. All right, so how are a parallelogram and a rectangle the same? How are they different? I love these how are they the same and how are they different questions because I get a lot of people that only answer one. We have to say how they're the same and how they're different. So let's say they're the same because So let's use what we just learned up here to help us answer that question. So we're talking about a parallelogram, which has two pairs of parallel sides, and a rectangle, which also has two pairs of parallel sides. So that's how they're the same. They're the same because they both have two sets of parallel sides. I'm going to do my different in another color. So now we have to say, how are they different? They are different because, and let's look at their descriptions to figure that out. A rectangle has 4 right angles. Well, look at this guy, this parallelogram. These are not right angles here. And a rhombus doesn't have right angles, and it's also a parallelogram. So that is the difference between a rectangle and a parallelogram, is we can call it a rectangle if it has 4 right angles. They are different because a rectangle has 4 right angles. All right, we said how they're the same. We said how they're different. We answered both parts of the question. Let's move on to our guided practice, and then you can complete your independent practice. So let's look at another example here because I really like it. Up at the top. Perpendicular sides form right angles. And we talked about that in 16.1. And I'll just draw an example here. These are perpendicular lines. They form that square corner. So perpendicular sides would be sides that would eventually cross. Like right here would have a perpendicular side. Perpendicular sides form right angles. Can a trapezoid have perpendicular sides? A trapezoid can have 2 right angles that form perpendicular sides. A trapezoid with 2 right angles is called a right trapezoid. So a lot of times we'll see trapezoids looking like this one here, but this is another way to draw a trapezoid. So I just liked that example because it just shows you like a different way to draw it. All right, so let's do our guided practice. I'm going to make sure that I have my notes paper handy so that I can use it to answer these questions because you're definitely going to need it to look at the different examples. So I have mine next to me. Number 1, what is true about all quadrilaterals? So at this point, I would say you can pause the video here and try these yourself, or you can follow along with me as examples, because especially when we get to 4, 5, 6, and 7, I would like to show you how to answer the questions before you try it, because you have to write all the possible names for each quadrilateral. So a lot of times with the videos for our contingency plans, we've been stopping them here and you're trying it yourself and then I'm going over it. But you can keep going with the video as we would in class with a guided practice, because I would like to guide you through answering these questions, because they are a little bit more challenging with classifying the shapes. So you don't have to pause it here. You can just keep following along with me. So what is true about all quadrilaterals? Well, what did we learn today about quadrilaterals? I'm looking back at my notes. They are a shape with 4 sides and 4 angles. So what's true about all of them? They all have 4 sides and they all have 4 angles. Ooh, what is the difference between a square and a rhombus for number 2? So look at your notes paper. There's one major difference between a square and a rhombus. So take a second, look at your notes paper, try to figure it out. I'm looking at mine. I'm looking at the definition of a square, and I see that it has 4 right angles and all sides are the same length. For the rhombus, it's a quadrilateral that has opposite sides that are parallel, and all of its sides are the same length, like the square, but it doesn't have right angles. It doesn't have 4 right angles, and that is our difference. So that's what makes these two shapes different. So I'm going to write a square has 4 right angles and a rhombus does not. Okay, for number 3, Shane drew a quadrilateral with at least 2 right angles and at least 1 pair of parallel sides. Name 3 quadrilaterals Shane could have drawn. When we say at least, that means minimum. Minimum of 2 right angles. Minimum of 1 pair of parallel sides. So that's not really too specific here. A lot of these quadrilaterals can fit that description. So we need at least 2 right angles and at least 1 pair of parallel sides. So name 3 quadrilaterals Shane could have drawn. So he could have drawn a rectangle, because a rectangle has at least 2 right angles. A rectangle actually has 4 right angles. Does it have at least 1 pair of parallel sides? Yes, it actually has 2 pairs of parallel sides. These sides here and these sides here. So Shane could have drawn a rectangle, so we can write that. And you can just list them. There's not much space to restate the question. Rectangle. He could have drawn a square, which also has at least 2 right angles. It actually has 4. And it has, once again, like the rectangle, the square has two sets of parallel sides. So that fits the description of at least one. So we can write a square and this is why I really like our another example, because look at this trapezoid here. It has two right angles, right? 1, 2, and then it has at least one pair of parallel sides right here. So that right trapezoid fits the description because we have at least two right angles, 1, 2, and at least one pair of parallel sides, one pair right there. So let's also write right trapezoid. And it has to be a right trapezoid. It has to be a trapezoid drawn like this, because if you had this type of trapezoid, it does not have any right angles. So you can't draw that kind, but you could draw this kind, the right trapezoid. All right. For 4 through 7, write all the names possible for each quadrilateral. So this gets fun because some of these quadrilaterals have 4 names, but the first thing is they are all quadrilaterals. So when we're classifying them all, the first name that we're going to give them is quadrilateral. So I'll write that first. Quadrilateral. And really, I mean, you could write it under all of them. They're all quadrilaterals. And today you might get tired of writing the word quadrilateral, especially because it's such a long word. But you'll probably get really good at spelling it today. Okay, so our first shape is a quadrilateral. Let's look at our notes page to help us kind of go through the different shapes and see which one it is. So it is a parallelogram if it has two pairs of parallel sides. So if you do have like something like a highlighter, or you can use your pencil to go over it, it kind of helps me to say like, okay, these two sides are parallel right here. And these two sides are parallel right here. So we can call that a parallelogram because it has two pairs of parallel sides. And we can give it one more name. What name do you think you would call it? It's a rectangle because it has 4 right angles, but its sides aren't all the same length, so we can't call it a square. So those are the 3 names that we're giving number 4. We can call it a quadrilateral, we can call it a parallelogram, we can call it a rectangle. All right, let's look at number 5. We already know it's a quadrilateral. It has 4 sides, but how else can we classify it? First, start with the most basic and then get to the most specific, like we did here. First we said it's a quadrilateral. It has 4 sides. Then we said it's a parallelogram. It has 2 sets of sides that are parallel. And then we gave it its most specific name, which is a rectangle. For here, we called it a quadrilateral. It has 4 sides. Can we call it a parallelogram? Does it have 2 sets of sides that are parallel? Well, yes, it does, because these two have parallel lines that would go on forever without touching. and there are also parallel lines right here. So its second name can be a parallelogram. Which maybe you also might get tired of writing today, because a lot of these shapes are parallelograms. Now let's look at our other shapes. Can we call it a rectangle? No, because these are not right angles. Can we call it a square? Once again, no, because it does not have right angles. Can we call it a rhombus? We can't call it a rhombus because rhombuses have all sides that are the same length, and these two that I highlighted in yellow are longer than the orange sides. So we can't call it a rhombus. Can we call it a trapezoid? Well, a trapezoid is not a parallelogram, so no, it's not a trapezoid. These are the only two names for this shape. It is a quadrilateral, and it is a parallelogram. Moving on to number 6. That one looks familiar. So first let's highlight the parallel sides. These two sides are parallel. Where's my orange? And these two sides here are parallel. So it is, drumroll, parallelogram. Now, how else can we name it? Well, squares are very funny because there's one thing that makes them different from a rectangle. So, see how it says here, a square is a rectangle? The description of a rectangle is that a rectangle has 4 right angles. So, that's why we can call a square a rectangle. A square has 4 right angles, just like a rectangle does. The only thing that makes a square different is it also has 4 equal sides. So this shape, we can call it a rectangle because it has 4 right angles, and we can call it a square because it has 4 sides that are equal. So when you see a square is going to have 4 names. Wait, a square is going to have 5 names. What is the last name that we could call this square? Go back to your notes. There's one more shape. This is why squares are just so interesting. They have so many names. You can also call a square a rhombus because by definition, a rhombus is a quadrilateral, so it has 4 sides. Opposite sides that are parallel, so yes, the square has that too. All of its sides are the same length. That is true about a square. So underneath of that fit our 5th name, rhombus. We can also say that that's a rhombus. So when you see a square, which there is one down here in your independent practice, you can use number 6 to help you because that's a lot of names. All right, for number 7, here's our first shape that is not a parallelogram because all of these lines are going in different directions. None of them are parallel. So just to show you what that means, if you took your pencil and extended the line here, and here's the opposite side, those lines are not parallel. They're going to eventually run into each other at some point. They're not going in the same direction. And same goes with these 2 lines here, these opposite sides. If I extended them with my pencil, they would also eventually run into each other, and that shows me that they're not parallel. So that is not a parallelogram. So since this shape is not a parallelogram, It's also not a rectangle, not a square, not a rhombus. Is it a trapezoid? A trapezoid is a quadrilateral with only one pair of parallel sides. Well, this shape here, he doesn't have any parallel sides at all. His sides are all crazy, and the lines are all going in different directions. So he has one name. He is just a quadrilateral. And that's it. Just a four-sided shape. Okay, so I hope after this super long video, I just noticed that it's 35 minutes, I hope that you have a better understanding of how to classify four-sided shapes, which are quadrilaterals, to help you answer the rest of the questions. Okay, I miss you guys. I know all of your other teachers do, and I hope that you are staying safe and healthy at home, and we'll see you in the next video.